There are moments in life that haunt you forever. Those moments when everything you believe to be true shatters, leaving you with a cold, uneasy feeling deep in your stomach. Imagine being a detective, walking into a case that seems straightforward on the surface, only to find that it's anything but. This is the story of a mother, a seemingly normal woman, who lived her life like anyone else, raising her children, managing her household, and going about her day-to-day routine. But behind the facade of normality lay something far more sinister. In the course of his investigation, Detective Mark Thompson would learn that this case would be the one that would forever change his view on human nature and on the darkest corners of motherhood. You're probably thinking, what could possibly be so horrifying about a mother? After all, mothers are supposed to be our protectors, our caregivers, the ones who nurture us through life's trials and triumphs. But this story isn't like any other one you've heard. What if I told you that the woman you'd expect to be the most loving, compassionate figure in the lives of her children was, in reality, hiding a secret so monstrous, so twisted, that even seasoned investigators couldn't believe their own eyes? It's a shocking truth, one that Detective Thompson stumbled upon by sheer accident as he followed the crumbs of a case that seemed small at first, but soon spiraled into a nightmarish revelation that no one could have ever anticipated. Imagine yourself in Thompson's shoes for a moment. You walk into a scene, expecting to find a missing child, perhaps an overwhelmed parent struggling under the weight of life's pressures. But what he found was nothing short of a nightmare, a house of horrors tucked away behind the doors of what seemed to be an ordinary suburban home. A simple welfare check that was supposed to reassure the community turned into a chilling investigation that no one would ever forget. As Thompson delved deeper into the lives of the mother and her children, he began to uncover unsettling truths, one layer at a time. And the more he uncovered, the more the line between right and wrong blurred into something unrecognizable. You're probably wondering right now, how did this happen? What kind of mother could do something like this? Well, that's exactly what you're here to find out. You're about to join Detective Thompson on his journey, step by step, as he unravels the dark secrets that were buried deep within this family. But be warned, this isn't an easy story to hear. It will make you question everything you know about trust, family, and the lengths to which people can go to hide their true selves. It will take you places you never thought possible, showing you the unimaginable horrors that can exist behind closed doors. From the very first clue, Thompson had a feeling that something wasn't right. What started as a simple case of a missing child would soon lead him down a path where every new discovery felt like a punch to the gut. As he pieced together the bits and pieces of this twisted puzzle, the face of the mother, who, to the outside world, was the epitome of suburban perfection, began to crack, revealing a chilling reality that few could ever have prepared for. With each step, Thompson found himself drawn deeper into a web of lies, manipulation, and unthinkable cruelty. But the real shock came when Detective Thompson made a horrifying discovery hidden in plain sight. As he sifted through the mother's seemingly innocent belongings, he found a journal, an everyday item that could have been dismissed as something trivial. Yet, inside the pages of that journal lay the heart of the truth he was searching for. The words written there were so disturbing, so dark, that they left him frozen in disbelief. This wasn't just a case of neglect or mistreatment. It was far worse. But there was something even more sinister hidden in the depths of those pages. Something that would make everything Thompson thought he knew about this family and about the mother seem like a lie. You might be asking yourself, what's so terrible about a journal? Isn't that just a collection of thoughts, random musings? But what Thompson uncovered inside that journal wasn't just a personal account of someone's life. No, it was the blueprint for a carefully orchestrated nightmare, a carefully crafted story that painted the mother as the hero, the victim, and the villain all at once. It was a manipulative, calculated piece of work designed to mislead and deceive. And as Thompson dug deeper into the family's history, he discovered the chilling truth that the mother had been playing a long game, a game where the stakes were unimaginable. As the investigation continued, Thompson found himself growing more and more disturbed by the evidence that was stacking up. The twisted lies, the disturbing patterns of behavior, and the dark secrets that were slowly being exposed made it clear. This wasn't just about a mother's love for her children. This was about power, control, and the terrifying lengths a person would go to in order to maintain their grip on a world that they had carefully constructed. But what was the motive behind this disturbing behavior? What could drive a mother to such extreme actions? And how far would she go to protect the horrific secrets she had been hiding for years? If you think you have an idea of what's coming next, think again. As we continue this journey, the truth will slowly start to unfold, layer by layer, until you can't help but feel both captivated and horrified by what you're learning. But don't expect easy answers. This case is anything but simple. Each new revelation will leave you with more questions, more doubts, and more confusion about the nature of evil. And as Thompson gets closer to the truth, the stakes get higher, and the danger becomes more real than ever before. You may be asking yourself right now, how can someone like that exist? How can a mother, a woman we are supposed to trust and love, be capable of such horrors? Trust me, you're not alone in thinking that. Detective Thompson felt the same way as he unearthed the darkest corners of this case. But the more he uncovered, the clearer it became. The true horror wasn't just what this mother had done. It was what she had planned, what she had manipulated, and what she had carefully orchestrated to conceal the true extent of her cruelty. Now, I know you're eager to get to the next part of the story, to uncover the secrets, the twists, and the shocking truth about this sinister mother. But here's the thing. You can't fully understand the true depth of what happened until you follow this investigation through to the end. The next chapter holds the key to unraveling everything. And believe me, what comes next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about human nature and the darkness that can lie within. So, stay with me as we dive deeper into the horrifying truth behind this case. Don't click away, because the answers you're searching for are just around the corner. This is a story that will stick with you long after the screen goes dark. You're about to witness a truth so disturbing, so unsettling, that it will haunt you forever. Are you ready to face it? Stay tuned, because you're about to learn the terrifying truth that Detective Thompson uncovered, and once you do, you'll never look at the world the same way again. But be prepared, what you think you know is only the beginning. Detective Thompson had been working cases for over a decade. But this case, was different. When he first walked into the home of the Henderson family, everything seemed, on the surface, like a typical suburban house. A well-kept yard, a swing on the front porch, and the hum of a quiet neighborhood surrounding him. He had been called in for a routine welfare check, a seemingly small request that wouldn't have been anything to worry about. But as soon as he stepped inside, the unsettling feeling crept over him. It was as if something was off, something he couldn't quite put his finger on, but it gnawed at him relentlessly. The mother, Marie Henderson, greeted him with the warmth of someone who is used to having guests over, but there was a coldness behind her smile, a strange, calculated edge to her politeness that he couldn't shake. Marie Henderson had always been considered the epitome of a perfect mother. Her children, Emma and Lucas, were well-behaved, her house spotless, and her life seemingly perfect. But as Thompson started to dig deeper, he began to see cracks in that perfect image. Marie had been keeping to herself more recently, her social circle shrinking, her interactions with the community less frequent. The neighbors described her as once being a pillar of the neighborhood, always hosting gatherings and helping out at the local church. But over the last year, she had become more reclusive. What was the reason behind this sudden withdrawal? Was it simply the pressures of raising 2 children on her own, or was there something more at play here? Thompson couldn't ignore the way her children acted around her. Emma, the oldest at 15, appeared unusually quiet and withdrawn for her age, often looking to her mother for reassurance, as if she feared doing anything that might upset her. Lucas, only 9, seemed to be more energetic, but his eyes always darted around the room, as if he was constantly on edge. Both children were well-fed, well-dressed, and clean, but there was something hauntingly off about them. It was subtle, but it was there, an unease that lingered in their presence. Thompson couldn't help but wonder if there was more going on behind closed doors than anyone knew. In the days following that first welfare check, Thompson returned to the Henderson home several times. Each time, he noticed more inconsistencies in the stories he was being told. Marie claimed everything was fine. She explained that Emma had recently been struggling in school and Lucas had been acting out a bit more, but nothing out of the ordinary. And yet, there was something about her demeanor that didn't match her words. As if she was trying too hard to convince him that everything was perfectly fine, but the edges of her composure were fraying. It was the little things, the way she would quickly change the subject when he asked certain questions, or the way she would glance nervously towards the children whenever he spoke to them directly. Thompson began to sense that he was being led down a path of half-truths, and he wasn't buying it. The turning point came when Thompson learned about a recent incident at the local school. Emma had been absent for nearly a week, and when she returned, there was a noticeable change in her behavior. Her teachers described her as distant, almost withdrawn, and she refused to speak about where she had been. Thompson knew something was wrong, but no one could quite pinpoint what. Was it just typical teenage rebellion, or was there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? The pieces of the puzzle weren't fitting together, and yet, every instinct in Thompson's gut screamed that this was no ordinary case. It was as if he was being pulled deeper into a web of secrets, each one more twisted than the last. One evening, as he went through the school records and spoke to the teachers, a red herring presented itself. Another mother in the neighborhood, Jennifer Turner, had been overheard speaking about Marie Henderson in a rather strange context. According to a few sources, Jennifer had claimed that Marie had been involved in something troubling, though she wasn't specific. Jennifer, known for her gossip, was often dismissed by the locals, but Thompson couldn't ignore the feeling that her words might hold some weight. He went to her house under the guise of wanting to learn more about the neighborhood, but Jennifer was defensive, almost hostile, when he asked about Marie. Her vague responses only added fuel to Thompson's suspicions. Was Jennifer's sudden outburst about Marie simply the ramblings of a bored housewife, or was there some truth to her cryptic remarks? The deeper Thompson dug, the more tangled the web became. He learned that Marie had been keeping a journal, a fact that was discovered when he spoke to her ex-husband, Robert Henderson. The divorce had been amicable, or so it seemed, and Robert had no idea that his ex-wife had been hiding anything. But when Thompson pushed further, Robert mentioned that Marie had become obsessed with certain books and ideas over the past few years. She'd begun reading about control, manipulation, and the psychology of power dynamics. The nature of her newfound interests seemed harmless at first, but Thompson started to wonder if they had something to do with the change in her behavior. Was she studying these concepts for personal growth, or was there a more disturbing reason behind her fixation? The more Thompson thought about it, the more it seemed like the key to understanding Marie's transformation was buried in her past, hidden in plain sight, just waiting to be uncovered. One late night, as Thompson sifted through Marie's old social media accounts and emails, he stumbled upon something unexpected, a series of disturbing messages between her and an unknown individual. The messages were vague at first, but they hinted at something far darker. They mentioned secrets, promises, and a disturbing sense of urgency. The sender's identity was unclear, and there was no way to trace the messages back to anyone specific, but they painted a picture of someone who was manipulating Marie in ways that were hard to comprehend. Was Marie being controlled by someone else, or was she the mastermind behind a scheme far more twisted than anyone had imagined? The messages were the final piece of the puzzle, the piece that would lead Thompson down a path that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the case. But the deeper Thompson went, the more dangerous things became. Every lead seemed to take him in circles, and each person he spoke to seemed to hold a different version of the truth. Was Marie truly the mastermind, or was there someone else pulling the strings behind the scenes? The mystery deepened, and the tension mounted. With every passing day, Thompson felt the weight of the case pressing down on him, pushing him closer to a revelation that would turn his world upside down. As he stood at the edge of uncovering the truth, Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him, someone who didn't want the truth to come out. He was no longer sure who he could trust, and the walls around him seemed to be closing in. What was the real story behind Marie Henderson, and how far would she, or the person behind her, go to keep it hidden? The clock was ticking, and the answers he sought were tantalizingly out of reach. But Thompson was about to uncover a secret so dark, so horrifying, that it would change everything he thought he knew about human nature. Just when Detective Thompson believed he was inching closer to the truth, the case took a sudden and unsettling turn. The woman, Dr. Janice Rowe, had only seen the family a few times before abruptly ending their sessions. She had originally cited scheduling conflicts, but now, face to face, her demeanor was different. Nervous, guarded. She lowered her voice and admitted something she had never documented. During one session, Emma had drawn a disturbing picture and then quickly tried to hide it. It depicted a dark room, a figure with no face, and what looked like another child locked inside a cage. Dr. Rowe confronted Marie, who brushed it off as a fantasy Emma had picked up from a scary movie. But something about Marie's cold reaction unsettled her. She never saw them again after that. Before Thompson could press her for more details, a black SUV pulled up across the street. Two men in dark suits sat behind the tinted windows, watching. Dr. Rowe noticed it too. Her eyes widened with fear, and she abruptly ended the meeting. "You need to be careful," she whispered, gripping his arm. "There are people who don't want this story to come out." And with that, she rushed inside and deadbolted the door behind her. Thompson turned to look at the SUV again, but it was already pulling away. No license plate, no identifying marks. Just another unanswered question. But when he returned the next day to review the contents, the drive was gone. Completely vanished. No logs, no sign-out records, and no explanation from anyone on staff. It wasn't just misplaced, it had been deliberately removed. Thompson immediately sensed what this meant. Someone either inside the department or closely connected to the case was trying to erase evidence. And that kind of cover-up meant the truth he was chasing wasn't just dark, it was dangerous. Frustrated and now suspicious of people around him, Thompson doubled back to interview a former family therapist who had briefly worked with the Hendersons after their divorce. He had managed to secure a flash drive from Marie's home office, tucked away behind a loose panel in a drawer she likely assumed no one would ever think to check. The files on the drive were encrypted, but the folder names alone were enough to set off alarm bells. Thompson handed it over to the department's tech unit with clear instructions to keep it discreet. Determined to find answers, Thompson turned his attention to Robert Henderson, Marie's ex-husband. Robert had kept his distance throughout the investigation, claiming to be shocked by everything that had come to light. But Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. When questioned again, Robert admitted there had been something odd about Marie even before the kids were born, an obsession with maintaining control. She would test him constantly, set traps to see if he was lying, and had once gone so far as to fake a pregnancy scare just to see how he'd react under pressure. But the detail that caught Thompson's attention the most was a brief mention of Marie's childhood. According to Robert, Marie had been adopted after a tragic incident involving her birth family. The records were sealed, and she never spoke of them. When Thompson managed to track down someone who had worked at the group home where Marie spent part of her teen years, the story grew even stranger. The woman, now retired and hesitant to talk, finally revealed that Marie was known for manipulating the other children. She was smart, charming, and dangerous in subtle ways. One girl had gone missing during Marie's time there, and while nothing was ever proven, whispers had always lingered. When Thompson asked for the girl's name, the woman froze. "That's the thing," she said slowly. "We could never find a birth certificate. No family. It was like she didn't exist." Just as Thompson began to dig deeper into that past, his access to Marie's psychiatric files was suddenly revoked. A new court order had been filed, sealed records, emergency privacy protection, citing threats to her family's emotional safety. And the judge who approved it? An old friend of the Henderson family. Thompson wasn't just being blocked, someone was pulling strings to make sure he stayed in the dark. He realized then that Marie's influence ran much deeper than anyone thought. She wasn't just a mother hiding disturbing secrets. She was part of something larger, something calculated, something dangerous. That same evening, Thompson returned to his apartment to find his front door ajar. He immediately drew his weapon and swept the room, but no one was there. Nothing appeared stolen, but something had definitely been moved. A photo of his niece, who lived 2 states away, was face down on the coffee table. On the back, someone had written a message in smudged ink. "Stop digging, or the next welfare check will be for your family." That was no idle threat. It was a warning. Now paranoid, unsure who to trust, and fully aware he was being watched, Thompson was forced to reevaluate everything he had uncovered. What if someone close to the investigation, maybe even someone in his own department, was working to protect Marie? Or worse, what if Marie herself had planted the evidence that seemed to incriminate her, drawing attention away from someone else entirely? As Thompson stared at the cryptic message in his hand, a new lead came in, an anonymous tip about a second home, a rural cabin Marie allegedly visited often alone, where the children were never allowed to go. It wasn't on any public records. Not even Robert knew about it. No GPS tags. No receipts. Just a whispered address, scrawled across the bottom of a napkin from a diner miles out of town. If the tip was real, it could explain everything. But if it was a trap, Thompson knew he might not come back. Still, he had to follow it. He had to know the truth. Because now, it wasn't just about solving a case, it was about survival. And when he finally reached that cabin, what he would find inside would change the course of the investigation forever. But nothing could prepare him for what was waiting behind that locked door. As Detective Thompson stood in the shadows of the remote cabin, his hand hovering over the rusted doorknob, his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. It was a call from his partner, Detective Angela Ruiz, someone who had been his closest ally through the twists of this case, and one of the few people he still fully trusted. But the tremble in her voice on the other end made his blood run cold. She had just received an unmarked envelope at her apartment. No return address, no postage, just slid under her door sometime after she got home. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It was blurry, taken at night, but unmistakable. A picture of her younger brother, bound and gagged in the trunk of a car. There was a caption, scrawled in thick black marker across the bottom edge of the photo. It read, "Tell Thompson to walk away, or your family disappears next." Thompson didn't say a word at first. He just closed his eyes, breathed in the weight of it all, and realized that this wasn't just about Marie anymore. Someone else was orchestrating the shadows. And whoever it was had access to everything: movements, relationships, family addresses, even unlisted cabins that weren't supposed to exist. This was more than a sinister mother with a twisted past. This was a coordinated operation, and Thompson had already stepped too deep to turn back. Thompson told Ruiz to get to a safe house immediately and not to trust anyone, not even fellow officers, until they could trace the source of that photo. Thompson had heard whispers that those groups specialized in blackmail, erasure, and the silencing of witnesses under the guise of containment. He just never thought he'd come face to face with it in a case that began as a welfare check on a suburban mother. As Thompson finally pushed open the cabin door, the creak of the hinges was drowned out by the eerie silence inside. Dust clung to every surface, and the air reeked of mildew and something more chemical, ammonia maybe, or bleach. He moved slowly, careful not to disturb anything, but it didn't take long before he saw the wall. It was covered in newspaper clippings, some decades old, all linked by a single thread: missing children. Photos, articles, school flyers, and case summaries were pinned to corkboard with red string connecting them to faces, dates, and handwritten notes. In the center of the wall was a large photo of Marie, young, maybe 18 or 19, smiling beside another woman Thompson didn't recognize. The mystery woman's face was crossed out violently in red ink, with the word "traitor" scratched over and over beneath it. Ruiz's gut told her that this wasn't a coincidence. It was a message meant to rattle them, meant to crack their foundation and make them second-guess everything they knew. That old captain, a man who once mentored both of them, was rumored to have ties to private security groups that operated in legal gray zones. But as she hung up, she mentioned one last thing. The car in the picture had a distinct bumper sticker on it, something she hadn't seen in years. It belonged to their former captain, who had retired early and vanished off the grid after a suspicious internal investigation. The timing felt deliberate, almost surgical. Suddenly, Thompson's earpiece crackled to life with a scrambled signal. Ruiz again, barely audible, but frantic. "They're watching you, not just Marie. There's another player," she said between bursts of static. "Check the name, Sarah Klein. That's the woman in the photo.
She's not dead."
I think she's the key to all of this." But before he could respond, the signal dropped completely. Thompson stood frozen, staring at the name Ruiz had just uttered. Sarah Klein, a name he hadn't heard in years. She had been one of his earliest informants on a separate case involving underground child trafficking rings in the Midwest. She had disappeared just before she was scheduled to testify in court. No body, no trace. The case went cold. Everyone assumed she had been silenced. But now, it seemed she was alive and somehow tied to Marie Henderson's secret past. The walls began to close in. Thompson realized this wasn't just a case about a dangerous woman. It was about a network, a long-buried conspiracy that had swallowed victims for years under the radar. Marie, Sarah, the missing children, even the crooked ex-captain, they were all pieces of the same puzzle. And now that puzzle was being ripped apart by someone who didn't want the picture revealed. What made it even more unnerving was the idea that Marie herself might be a puppet in a much larger scheme. Could she have been a victim once, groomed to play her role, only to become a monster in her own right? Or had she always been a willing participant, hiding behind the carefully curated facade of a concerned mother? Just as Thompson moved toward a locked door in the back of the cabin, one that looked far newer than the rest of the structure, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message, no name attached. Just a grainy image. It was Ruiz, lying unconscious in the driver's seat of her car, a smear of blood on her forehead, the same Polaroid taped to the steering wheel. And beneath the image, a caption. "You brought her into this. Now watch her suffer." Every instinct told him to run, to drive straight to her last known location, to fix the damage this investigation had already caused. But something behind that locked cabin door whispered that he was closer than ever to the truth, that leaving now might mean never knowing what Marie and the others were really hiding. With his heart pounding and the weight of every unanswered question pressing down on him, Thompson reached for the key he had found earlier, buried in the floorboards. What he would find behind that door would either unravel the entire operation or bury him alive in secrets that were never meant to surface. And in that moment, he had no idea which one it would be. The key turned with a slow metallic groan, and the moment the door creaked open, a wave of cold air swept past Detective Thompson, carrying with it a damp, suffocating scent that clung to his skin like something alive. The room was pitch black, save for a single flickering bulb hanging low from the ceiling, swaying slightly as if someone had just left moments before. What lay inside wasn't what he expected. The walls were lined with old televisions, each playing distorted security footage on a loop, silent, grainy, and impossibly eerie. At first glance, the footage seemed unrelated. Children at playgrounds, hospital hallways, what looked like school cafeterias. But as Thompson watched, he realized the same figure appeared in nearly every reel. A woman, face always obscured by shadows or a wide hat, but the posture, the gestures, they were unmistakable. Marie. She had been watching more than just her own children. She had been tracking others. And not alone. Thompson's heart pounded against his ribs like a warning bell, loud enough that he could hear it in his ears. He reached for his phone, intending to call in backup, but the screen was black.
Dead.
Not just out of battery, it had been wiped. Every contact, every text, even the recent photos he had taken of the evidence board were gone. As he stood in stunned silence, trying to make sense of what was happening, the televisions flickered all at once. The screens froze, and then each one displayed the same static-filled image, a live feed of his apartment building's front door. A person stood just outside the entrance, holding something. It was dark and hard to make out, but the longer he stared, the more he recognized the silhouette. It was the neighbor's dog, lifeless in the figure's arms. A message was scrawled in red across the screen. Home is no longer safe. He backed out of the cabin, breath tight, every muscle in his body screaming to run, but there was nowhere to go that felt secure anymore. The game had changed. The investigation was no longer about Marie's secrets. It was about survival. Someone had anticipated every move he'd make, had been monitoring his location, and now they were sending him messages as clear as gunshots. It was no longer a case, it was personal. The realization hit like a gut punch. They weren't just watching. They were closing in. And they wanted him to know it. By the time he made it back to his car, the forest around him felt like it was breathing, alive with unseen eyes. As he started the engine, his dashboard lights flickered erratically, and the radio, despite being turned off, crackled with static before a voice, digitally distorted and emotionless, broke through. "You were never supposed to find the cabin. Someone failed." The voice cut out as abruptly as it had arrived, leaving behind an unbearable silence. Thompson gripped the wheel tighter, but his hands were slick with sweat, his mind spinning with questions that had no place to land. Who was someone? Who had led him here? And why was this place not already scrubbed clean? Was he part of their experiment now? He replayed every conversation they'd had over the last few weeks, wondering if there had been any sign, any moment where she might have known something and didn't tell him. Or worse, what if she had become a pawn too? What if that photo of her wasn't a threat, it was a warning from someone inside the circle who had tried to help? The paranoia was setting in, sharp and unrelenting, clawing its way under his skin. Everyone he trusted suddenly felt like a question mark. On the edge of town, he pulled into a cheap motel parking lot and checked in under a false name. Just another name on one of Marie's twisted lists? His thoughts spiraled, looping back to Angela Ruiz. She hadn't answered a single call since that final, horrifying text. He didn't even bring his badge. Too risky now. His thoughts were heavy, frantic, and looping. The woman in the cabin photo, Sarah Klein, hadn't resurfaced. The Polaroid threats were escalating. His phone had been compromised, his apartment watched. The walls weren't just closing in, they were rigged to explode. And beneath all of it, a single thought whispered in the back of his mind, unshakable and terrifying. What if Marie isn't the end of the story? What if she's the beginning? Unable to sleep, Thompson sat in the dim light of the motel room, staring at the only piece of paper he managed to keep from the scene, the napkin with the address of the cabin, now smudged with blood from when he cut his hand on the doorframe. As he studied it, he noticed something new, barely legible beneath the original ink. A second address, scribbled hastily, only visible when the napkin was held to the light. He hadn't seen it before, and now he couldn't ignore it. It was another property, not listed under Marie's name, but belonging to a shell company tied to one of the groups Thompson had investigated years earlier in a case that had mysteriously been shut down. The group had disappeared from headlines, buried under bureaucratic red tape. But this second address might be the missing link. Or it might be the end of him. He folded the napkin slowly, tucked it into the pocket of his jacket, and sat back in the motel chair, eyes never leaving the door. He didn't know if he'd make it through the night. He didn't know who was coming next, or if he was being watched even now. But he did know one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever this was, whatever Marie had started, it was far from over. And somewhere out there, someone was already preparing the next move. Just after 3 a.m., with exhaustion pressing down like wet cement and shadows dancing across the peeling motel wallpaper, Detective Thompson finally closed his eyes for what he thought would be a fleeting moment of rest. But the silence was shattered by a soft knock, 3 times, evenly spaced, calm. Too composed for someone panicked. He sat up instantly, heart thudding, reaching for his weapon, every nerve on high alert. Through the peephole he saw her. Angela Ruiz. Disheveled, soaked in rain, her eyes wide with something that looked like fear, or maybe guilt. She stepped inside without asking, clutching a folder wrapped in plastic and a look in her eyes that told Thompson everything was about to shift. And it did. What she said next shattered the entire foundation of the case he thought he was building. "I lied to you," she whispered, almost choking on the words. "I wasn't just investigating Marie. I was helping her." Thompson stood frozen, unable to comprehend what he was hearing. Angela, his only trusted source in this storm of deception, had been on the inside, not just as a distant observer, but as a participant. And worse, she had come clean not out of guilt, but because she was terrified. She revealed that Marie hadn't acted alone, nor was she the mastermind. She had been working for someone else. Someone with influence, money, and the ability to disappear people without a trace. Marie was simply the face of the horror, the one designed to draw the spotlight and absorb the heat if everything came crashing down. Angela handed over the folder with shaking hands. Inside were documents, real estate transactions, wire transfers, flight logs, all leading back to a name Thompson hadn't heard in over a decade. Gregory Vance. A retired child psychologist who had once been exposed in a medical scandal involving unorthodox behavioral research on minors. The case had been buried quickly after a few high-profile settlements, and Vance had disappeared from public view. But here he was again, connected to Marie through a fake nonprofit posing as a children's rehabilitation center. It had all been a cover. The donations, the summer camps, the therapy sessions. They were building behavioral profiles, tracking potential vulnerabilities, and then isolating targets. Families with histories of trauma, single mothers under stress, children showing signs of mental health issues. Angela had stumbled upon it 2 years ago when investigating a missing child report that mysteriously vanished from the department's database. She got too close. They offered her a choice: silence or inclusion. Now, everything made sense. The strange surveillance, the emotional manipulation, the eerie predictability of Marie's moves. She wasn't being sloppy, she was being guided. Thompson's investigation had never been off track, it had been rerouted. He was being pushed along a trail specifically constructed to collapse under him at the right moment. And that moment, he now realized, had just arrived. Angela wasn't just scared for her life. She had found something she wasn't supposed to. The hidden files. The archive of video footage showing not just Marie, but other women, mothers from different states, speaking in code, following the same eerie behavioral patterns. They were part of something bigger. A network. Thompson reeled as Angela detailed her discovery. There was a secondary location tied to the nonprofit. A secluded treatment facility out in Nevada, officially closed for renovations but still receiving supply shipments monthly. The financial trail pointed to continuous operations. And worse, 2 names appeared repeatedly in the intake logs, children from families Thompson had personally seen listed as deceased in the case files he had been handed at the precinct. The documents were altered. He was never meant to know they were still alive, which meant someone within law enforcement was in on it. The floor beneath him felt like it was cracking open. Every assumption he'd made, every instinct he'd trusted, it had all been skillfully manipulated. And just as he opened his mouth to respond, there was a sudden crash outside the motel room window. A figure in black darted past the glass, followed by the unmistakable sound of a silence shot piercing the motel sign. They were being hunted now. Not for what they knew, but for what they were finally starting to understand. This wasn't about Marie. It was never just about her. She was the lure. The smoke screen. The first chapter of a story that was far darker than anyone could imagine. And as Thompson and Angela scrambled to flee into the dark, one question began to drown out all the others. How many people in this town were involved? And how deep did this twisted web actually go? As the night deepened and the Nevada highway stretched out like an endless ribbon of dread, Thompson drove with both hands locked on the wheel, his jaw clenched. Angela slumped silently in the passenger seat. Her confession still echoed in his mind, like a sharp, repeating siren. The facility she spoke of, the so-called rehabilitation center, was real. And now, she admitted she had lied, that she had been complicit in helping Marie evade capture. Even if it was out of fear, even if it was under duress, it didn't erase the blood on her hands. But what shook him even deeper wasn't just what Angela had done, it was who else might be involved. Because buried in the list of personnel tied to the facility in Nevada was a name Thompson hadn't allowed himself to think about in years, his older brother, Isaac. But more than the evidence, it was her betrayal that twisted his gut. For months, she had been his only ally. The only person who hadn't turned away when his case started unraveling into madness. The documents she had stolen, the flight records, the video files, they were undeniable. Isaac Thompson had once been a respected pediatric trauma therapist, celebrated for his work with abuse victims, especially children rescued from dangerous homes. But something had gone wrong. Years ago, after a particularly controversial case involving a foster child who had accused multiple caretakers of abuse, Isaac had walked away from his career, citing burnout and disillusionment. The family never got the full story, only whispers, only fragments. Thompson had buried it, chalked it up to personal failure. But now here was his name, tied to a facility at the heart of a child trafficking conspiracy, buried in the same paper trail that linked Marie, Vance, and Angela's compromised investigation. The air inside the car turned suffocating. The truth was unraveling too fast, too painfully. He was no longer chasing monsters. He was starting to find them in his own bloodline. They arrived at the outskirts of the facility just before dawn. Hidden behind rows of dead trees and weather-beaten fences, it looked abandoned at first glance. But Angela pointed out the subtle markers: a recently used generator, fresh tire tracks, a faint humming from within the main building. Thompson parked out of sight and told Angela to wait. She refused. "I've gone too far already," she said, her voice hollow. "If I stop now, I'm already dead." They made their way through a broken gate and slipped inside. The building smelled of bleach and mold, like someone had tried to erase whatever had happened there but had run out of time or energy. In one hallway, lined with rusted lockers, Thompson spotted a flicker of movement. They crept forward, only to find a child. A boy, maybe 9 or 10, sitting on the floor in tattered clothes, his eyes wide and glazed. No words, just shallow breathing and a slow, rhythmic rocking. Angela reached out, but the boy flinched violently, crawling backward, muttering numbers under his breath. Thompson crouched beside him and noticed something etched into the wall behind him: scratches. Tallies.
Dozens of them.
The boy had been counting days. And he wasn't the only one. They stumbled upon a locked corridor deeper inside, where muffled cries echoed from behind reinforced doors. Thompson picked one open and found another child, then another.
Drugged. Confused.
Left in isolation. Some of them wore ankle tags. Most didn't even know where they were. He realized with horror that this wasn't just a rogue facility. It was active. Fully operational. And then came the moment that nearly broke him. In one of the rooms, under flickering fluorescent lights, Thompson found a stack of patient logs. He flipped through them, scanning names. One file stopped him cold. Emily Ruiz, Angela's niece. Reported missing 3 years ago, presumed drowned in a lake accident. But here she was, listed as a Level 2 behavioral observation subject.
Alive.
Transported from one site to another. Angela collapsed when she saw the file, shaking violently. "They told me she was gone," she sobbed. "They told me she drowned. I never even questioned it." Before they could search further, the alarm blared. Motion sensors had been triggered. Someone else was here. Thompson grabbed the files and pulled Angela toward the back exit, but their path was blocked by 3 figures in uniform. Not law enforcement, private security. And one of them was Isaac. The standoff was ice cold. Isaac raised his hand, signaling the guards to stand down. He looked thinner, older, worn from something Thompson couldn't define. But his voice was calm, eerily calm. "I knew you'd come," Isaac said. "I tried to keep you away from this. You were never supposed to see it." Thompson stepped forward, barely able to speak through the fury and betrayal choking him. "You did this? You're part of this." Isaac didn't answer directly. Instead, he gave his brother a choice. "You walk away now, and I make this disappear. You and Angela get out clean. We burn the footage, seal the logs, relocate the kids. No one will find you. But if you stay, if you take this to the public, we both lose everything. And those kids, they disappear for good. We shut it all down and they scatter. You'll never see them again." It wasn't just a threat. It was a trap. A devil's bargain wrapped in a moment of impossible clarity. If Thompson exposed everything, the weight of it could destroy the entire law enforcement system. He had seen it already, the cover-ups, the tampered files, the vanished witnesses. This went all the way up. But if he walked away now, stayed silent, he could save those children, rescue Emily, and keep Angela alive. Everything in him screamed for justice, for vengeance, for the truth to be known. But the cost was too high. The price of the truth could be dozens of innocent lives, lost in the shadows forever. The room fell into silence, the kind that cuts through your spine. Isaac stepped forward, lowering his voice. This isn't about you anymore. It never was. You think you're a hero, but heroes don't survive this. They become martyrs. Ghosts. And with that, he handed Thompson a flash drive. This is what you came for. Take it.
Go.
Or stay and burn with the rest of us. As Thompson stood frozen, the sounds of movement echoed from down the hallway. More guards approaching. Angela clutched his arm, trembling, her eyes pleading. And in that moment, faced with the truth of his brother's betrayal, the weight of a system rotting from the inside out, and the lives of countless children hanging in the balance, Thompson realized there was no right choice. Only the one he could live with. And as the screen fades to black, viewers are left asking themselves, what would you do when the line between justice and survival disappears completely? Trending keywords: true crime exposed, secret facility, child trafficking ring, real-life horror story, twisted family secrets, police cover-up, whistleblower, government conspiracy, Nevada case files, abandoned treatment center, psychological thriller, true detective unraveling, survivor stories, justice versus silence, dark truth revealed. Thompson didn't remember the sprint to the car. Only the sting of desert wind slicing through his lungs and Angela's hand gripping his sleeve like a lifeline. The flash drive Isaac handed over felt like it burned through his pocket, a red-hot brand that tethered him to every horrific image and document it contained. Once they cleared the main road and lost sight of the facility, neither of them spoke. There were no words left. But as they reached a safe house on the outskirts of Reno, an old contact's cabin buried deep in the hills, reality crashed back in with the sickening force of a freight train. The flash drive's contents weren't limited to the facility or the children they had seen. This wasn't just about Isaac, or Angela, or even Marie. It was bigger, much bigger, disguised behind nonprofit slogans and government grants. And worst of all, it had been going on for decades. Angela sat frozen at the edge of the couch, eyes locked to the screen, lips trembling. This isn't a ring, she whispered. It's a system. A whole machine. The realization nearly broke them both. Every person they had trusted during their investigation, commanding officers, court liaisons, even journalists, had played a part in maintaining the silence. Some out of fear, others for money, and many for something darker: belief. A twisted belief that what they were doing was necessary, that some kids couldn't be saved, only repurposed. But it wasn't until Thompson tried to call in his old mentor, Captain J. Morgan, the man who trained him, vouched for him, pulled him out of the gutter after his rookie breakdown, that the betrayal cut deepest. He expected Morgan to be stunned, maybe even enraged. Well-known therapists and judges who signed off on falsified custody transfers. Corporate executives from pharmaceutical companies financing the treatment programs for behaviorally challenged youth. It went international: Europe, South America, parts of Asia, all linked through a web of shell corporations and false identities. The trafficking wasn't just happening. It was institutional. Sanitized. Video files, encrypted emails, coded documents, financial transactions, they were all there. Each folder opened another wound. High-profile donations funneled through fake charities. But the voice on the other end of the line was too calm, too measured. I told you to let this one go, Morgan said. I told you it would eat you alive. Thompson's breath caught. You knew. There was a long pause. Then Morgan answered, his tone flat. You think you're the first one to get close? You think you're going to blow it all up with one flash drive? I've buried better cops than you, Thompson. You should have stayed buried, too. Thompson dropped the phone like it was laced with acid. The man he had idolized, his father figure after the real one disappeared from their lives, had been the one handing him just enough rope to hang himself with. Angela started hyperventilating in the corner, realizing that no safe house, no precinct, no newsroom was untouched. "We can't go to the feds," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They'll kill us before we even log in." That night, paranoia wrapped around them like smoke. A shadow passed the window twice. A parked car appeared and vanished near the edge of the road. Drones buzzed overhead, maybe nothing, maybe everything. The walls creaked like they were listening. Thompson didn't sleep. He sat at the table with the drive, a half-empty bottle of bourbon and a Glock. Every few minutes, he'd glance at Angela, make sure she was still breathing. And still on his side. But even that wasn't certain anymore. Somewhere in the back of his mind, doubt started to whisper. Why had Angela confessed now? Why at the facility? Why give up Marie's location only after they'd been discovered? He hated himself for thinking it, but the seeds were there. Maybe she'd led him into the trap. Maybe she hadn't just been running from the truth. Maybe she was part of it. The kind of person they let close to keep others off the scent. And yet, he didn't confront her. He didn't dare. Not yet. Not until he knew for sure. At sunrise, Angela finally spoke again, her voice hoarse. "There's something I didn't tell you," she said, not meeting his eyes. "There's another copy of the data, hidden off-grid, in case we didn't make it out." She swallowed hard. "But I had to tell someone else where it was. Someone I trust." Thompson stared at her, the air going still. "Who?" She hesitated too long. Before she could answer, a sharp knock echoed through the cabin. Not the door, glass. A small object smashed against the window pane and landed on the floor with a hollow clink. It was a burner phone. A red notification blinked on the screen. One new video file. Thompson picked it up, dread already bubbling in his stomach. He played the clip, and within seconds, his blood turned to ice. It was footage from less than 30 minutes ago. A gas station. A child. Emily Ruiz. But this time, she wasn't alone. She was with Marie. And Marie wasn't dragging her away. Emily was holding her hand. Smiling. Voluntarily. The timestamp was current. The location was just 20 miles from where they were hiding. And then came the twist. Standing in the background, partially obscured by a newsstand, was Angela. Staring directly into the security camera. Like she wanted to be seen. Thompson dropped the phone. Angela hadn't moved. She was still at the table, eyes wide, breathing shallow, silently watching him unravel. And before he could speak, before he could even raise his voice, her expression shifted. Not guilt, not fear, but something much colder. Resignation. Trending keywords: True Crime 2025, Child Trafficking Investigation, Exposed Cover-Up, Elite Conspiracy, Secret Video Footage, Dark Family Betrayal, Government Whistleblower, Shocking Surveillance Footage, Nevada Child Facility, Law Enforcement Corruption, Criminal Web Exposed, Emotional Breakdown, Shocking True Crime Story, Viral Investigation, Hidden Truth Unraveling. Thompson had stared death in the face before, too many times to count, honestly. But this wasn't like a shootout in a busted motel or kicking down doors on a narcotics bust. This was something different, something far more insidious. This was soul-deep terror, the kind that leaves a permanent mark. As he sat there with the burner phone still glowing in his hand and Angela staring through him like she'd already rehearsed what came next, the world seemed to go impossibly still. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the air had thickened with betrayal and something else, something colder. Acceptance. Angela didn't flinch, didn't try to defend herself. She simply stood and, with a whisper of movement, pulled a small object from her coat pocket, a second flash drive, identical to the one Thompson had fought so hard to protect. "You never had the only copy," she said quietly, not a trace of panic in her voice. "You were never meant to." The word struck like a slap. The footage of Marie and Emily holding hands, her own face in the background. It was all part of a plan. A final manipulation. And now he was staring at someone who might not have betrayed him, but might never have truly been on his side to begin with. Angela placed the flash drive on the table between them like a weapon in a standoff. They knew you'd come after me. They needed someone like you, clean enough to be believable, but angry enough to be disposable. You were the story they'd let leak, the tragic fall of the good cop. That way, if anything slipped through the cracks, it'd just look like your obsession finally broke you. But before Thompson could respond, the front door creaked open. No knock. No warning. Just a figure stepping into the cabin like they owned the place. It was Morgan. Captain Morgan, still in his dress blues, still wearing that damn silver badge like it meant something. You should have stayed buried, John, he muttered, shaking his head. Now I've got to make you vanish properly. Thompson stood slowly, the Glock in his hand feeling heavier than it ever had. Why? His voice cracked, and he hated that it did. Why children? Why the lies? You were supposed to be the one good thing in all this. Morgan scoffed, taking another step forward. Because nobody gives a damn until there's blood on camera. And by then, it's too late. These kids, they were forgotten long before we showed up. We just used what was already broken. He turned to Angela. You ready? Angela didn't move. Something in her expression shifted, barely, but enough for Thompson to catch it.
Doubt.
Regret. Maybe both. Morgan noticed it too. Don't get soft now, he growled. We built this on silence, and we'll bury it the same way. But then, in the split second before Morgan raised his weapon, Angela did something unexpected. She stepped in front of Thompson. The shot rang out, deafening inside the cabin. Angela crumpled to the floor, blood blooming across her chest. Thompson fired instinctively, hitting Morgan in the shoulder and sending him staggering back through the doorway. The old man dropped his gun, slumping against the frame, groaning but alive. Outside, tires screeched, Angela's backup plan. She hadn't come alone. Flashing headlights tore through the trees as two black SUVs boxed in the road. Thompson scrambled to her side, pressing his hands against her wound. Why? He whispered, the tears burning down his face. Why now? Angela coughed, a weak smile curling at the edges of her lips. Because I thought I could live with what I'd done. But seeing you fight like that, I remembered who I used to be, before they twisted it all. She slipped the second flash drive into his palm. This one has everything. Names, accounts, real-time tracking. Get it out. Blow it all up. But before he could answer, the SUV's doors burst open and armed men flooded the cabin. Black tactical gear, faces masked, weapons raised. Not cops. Not federal agents. Private. The kind of team only bought by money and loyalty. Thompson stood, gun ready, knowing it was useless. The lead mercenary stepped forward, scanning the room, and paused. He stared at Thompson. Then, slowly, he reached up, removed his mask. It was Isaac. Only it wasn't. This man looked like Isaac, but older. Colder. His twin brother. You thought Isaac was a whistleblower? He said with a sneer. He was the bait. You walked right into the storm, detective. Now we get to erase every loose end again. Thompson didn't flinch. He clutched the flash drive tighter, knowing that uploading it was the only thing left that mattered. That was the final play. But just before the man could give the order, a low rumble echoed in the distance. Helicopters. Real ones. Thompson's backup, the one call he'd made, just in case. A war zone erupted around the cabin, gunfire cracking through the trees, screams ricocheting through the valley. Thompson dragged Angela's body out the back, through the pine brush, as flames began licking at the wooden walls. He made it to the ridge, to signal range. And there, bleeding and broken, he hit upload. But here's the twist no one saw coming. 3 days later, the story went viral, #government cover-up, #trafficking ring exposed, and #whistleblower truth all hit trending. Thousands of people demanded justice. Politicians made statements. Investigations were announced. Then, just as quickly as it began, the headlines vanished. The articles were scrubbed. The journalists disappeared. Angela's name never showed up in any records. Marie was reported rescued by a nonprofit with ties to no known agency. And Thompson? He was last seen at a rest stop outside Sacramento, sitting alone on a bench, clutching a flash drive that no longer contained anything at all. Because in the end, the machine didn't care who told the truth. It only cared who controlled it. Trending keywords: True Crime Climax 2025, Conspiracy Unraveling, Government Betrayal, Viral Investigation Deleted, Shocking Twist Ending, Deep State Exposure, Whistleblower Silenced, Dark Web Truth, Final Showdown, True Crime Plot Twist, Trending Crime Story, Secret Flash Drive, Child Trafficking Ring Exposed, Real versus Fake Justice, Unresolved Mystery Ending. Months had passed since that chaotic night in the woods, but the silence that followed was louder than any gunfire Thompson had ever heard. The world had moved on, just as it always did. Hashtags faded. Public outrage simmered down. The news cycle chewed up the scandal and spat it out for something flashier, shinier, and easier to stomach. No arrests were made. No formal charges. No congressional hearings, no names named. Everything, every hard-earned truth, was buried under red tape, non-disclosure agreements, and convenient memory lapses from those in power. Thompson, once the man with nothing left to lose, had become a ghost. He didn't return to the force. He didn't go on the talk shows. He didn't write a tell-all book or leak the story to the press. He simply vanished into the backdrop of America, another nameless man with a haunted past and a truth too dangerous to speak aloud. He settled in a small coastal town, far from the place where it all went wrong, where the only sounds were ocean waves and the creak of old porch steps beneath his boots. Most days, he sat quietly by the water, watching the tide roll in and out like it carried pieces of his soul with it. His body still bore the scars of that final confrontation, his shoulder never quite healed right, and his hearing in one ear was gone. But the real damage lived deeper, in the sleepless nights, in the way he flinched at distant sirens or dark SUVs with tinted windows. Still, he wasn't entirely alone. Marie had been placed with a new family, far from any spotlight, and Thompson checked in through back channels now, and then just to make sure she was safe. That was all he ever wanted, to know that one life, at least, had been saved. Every once in a while, a letter would arrive. No return address. No signature. Just a line or two, sometimes a photo. Angela, if she was still alive, had left behind a network that operated in whispers and shadows. And through it, Thompson learned that the rot ran deeper than he could have imagined. Politicians, CEOs, private military contractors. The trafficking ring had been just one arm of a much larger beast, one that spanned continents and currencies, fueled by silence and sustained by fear. The drive he uploaded had triggered chaos, but only for a moment. The real players adapted, evolved, buried their secrets deeper. And yet, the smallest embers of truth still glowed. Somewhere out there, a young journalist was digging through encrypted files that shouldn't exist. Somewhere else, a hacker had leaked coordinates to anonymous message boards that were quickly wiped but not forgotten. People were waking up, asking questions, refusing to look away. Maybe that was the real legacy of Thompson's fight, not justice, not closure, but disruption. A fracture in the illusion. Enough to let the light in. One late evening, as the sky turned blood red over the ocean and gulls cried out over crashing waves, Thompson found something tucked beneath the mat at his front door. It was a manila envelope, unmarked, unsealed. Inside, a photo. Marie, older now, smiling wide and carefree, holding hands with a woman whose face was obscured. On the back, scribbled in familiar handwriting, were the words, "She remembers you. She says thank you." Thompson sat down slowly on the porch, staring out toward the darkening water. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He just let the moment settle around him, heavy and quiet. For the first time in a long while, something like peace threaded through the ache in his chest. He hadn't changed the system. He hadn't taken down the cabal or broken the cycle. But he had mattered to someone. And sometimes that was enough. Still, in the final light of dusk, he noticed something strange. A black car parked across the street, engine idling. It had been there the past 3 nights. Same make, same plates. No one ever got out. No one ever went in. Just headlights cutting through the darkness, watching. Thompson didn't move. He just leaned back, heart steady, eyes locked on the shadows. Because if they were coming for him again, they'd find he wasn't afraid anymore. He'd already walked through hell. And he remembered the way back. Trending keywords: true crime ending explained, final twist true crime, whistleblower story conclusion, child trafficking survivor, secret files exposed, unresolved mystery, what happened next, haunting final scene, viral conspiracy theory 2025, dark web truth uncovered, corrupt elite exposed, survivor closure, emotional true crime story, hidden government secrets, black car surveillance ending.